Eric was our chief of staff when we took over the majority, and I'd sit here and I get ready to say something and I think, oh no, he's sitting right here, you know. But he lived through this and the reorganization and everything like that, and this building is very hectic, very, very hectic, and sometimes you have to grab people on the fly to try to get your comments to the legislator, which is actually the very worst time to try to do it because they're busy, they're going someplace. My office is right down the road. Right down the hallway here. If you ever need to talk to me, just come in and talk to my assistant, the person I work for, because I do work for her. Her name's Nancy, and just say you're in the building, and if you can grab 5 minutes or whatever, we'll try to fit you in, because if you're here, it's important to you, and it's important to me to at least hear what you have to say. Tim and I talked last night about what my role here was today. If you're coming in to talk to a legislator, keep one thing in mind. They want to be anywhere but sitting in front of you at that point in time. They have other places they're going and doing things. Sometimes you'll catch them in a down moment. They'll give you all the time in the world. But a lot of time they're running from point A to point B, meetings, committee meetings, different things. Be ready to get right to the point with whatever you're trying to talk to them about. They don't need to hear. I'm not going to tell you names, but there's some people came in and they had some serious issues that needed to be listened to and talked about, but all they wanted to talk about were all the superfluous things around the issue that really didn't have anything to do with the issue. They want to tell you the whole history of how they got to where they are when the issue is what's important. And sometimes in police work, it was always that way too. Somebody gets smacked upside the head, that's what you need to know. When did it happen? Who did it? Why? They don't need to know 3 weeks ago where you had a conversation with Joe Blow down the road, which led to a conversation over here, which I think this is why he hit me. Those things get lost in translation, and you lose the interest of the person you're talking to. So if you really want to get a message across to somebody, come in and say, I need just a few minutes of your time. This is the issue I want to talk about. Give them enough to make them interested in what you're doing. Don't overload them with facts and details at that point until they start to say, well, I need some more. Do you have any material? I tried. It's impossible. I get so many people that bring reams of stuff for me to look at. If it's a fact sheet, I read it. If it's something that I can read, as I'm sitting in another meeting, not paying attention or something, and I can glance down and look at it, I'll do that. But if it's this thick, I'm probably not going to get through it. So it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time, your time to try to do that. It's a waste of time of whoever put it together. I'm sure other people will read it, but a legislator, they're bouncing around this building. It's just crazy in here sometimes. And in June, it's really bad. June is our most disorganized, hectic month up here because everybody wants something done that day. I don't know how to make it better. We thought about it. We tried to do different things. We have made some things better around here, but just keep one thing in mind. I am the Speaker of the House, or 41 members of the House. They are not my employees. I can't make them do anything. I can't make them sit down and talk to you. They are 41 independent contractors. And in your work, you have independent contractors you probably deal with, and they're very difficult to deal with sometimes. I can't fire these people because Lord knows I have a list that I would love to. But I can't. So I have to learn to work with them and talk with them. And if I want them to go in this way on an issue or to do something for our state, I have to communicate and get them to agree that that's the way we need to go. You can't do it as a group all the time. A lot of time it takes, if you have 41 people, it might take 30 different meetings to get them to go that direction. And this is where all the time comes in. But I'm just telling you that so you understand the inside of this building a little bit better. And if you're going up and trying to talk to somebody and they're kind of trying to get away, let them go. Give them another time. Just give them the time to finish doing what they're doing, because what they're doing is important as well. Not to minimize what your side and your issue is or anything of that nature, but that's how you have to handle this building. At least that's what I think. What do you think? I mean, you're here every day. You're here down there, and you lived it, so he retired young from this building. So I don't know what else to tell you right now. I mean, I think you want to just to give and take.
Well, let me just one question is take the prerogative of the moderator just to ask one short question. If there's a serious issue, an important issue that somebody wants to bring to your attention, to the attention of legislators in general, when should they start that process? Obviously, June is not a good time. You've indicated that. But how much lead time?
It depends on the issue. I mean, it really does. I mean, you have to understand how the building works. So in January, nothing gets done, really. I mean, we're the 1st of January. We're only in for 9 days in January. We're only in session Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays, and we're not in session every week. So there's a schedule that's put out. We have a website. Go on the website. You can find out when we're in session. In January, especially the first year of the 2-year session, the General Assembly, where there's reorganization going on, there's new committees going on, and there's no legislation held over from the year before. Everything starts new on the 12th or 13th of January, whatever that second Tuesday is. So really getting a piece of legislation from start to finish in both houses in January is spectacular. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen very often. I did it this year, but it doesn't happen very often. And then at the end of January, we're out of here. We're not even here for 6 weeks because the Joint Finance Committee is then meeting. And that is an important part for you guys, I would imagine. There's 12 people. Everybody know what Joint Finance Committee is composed of? So there's 12 members on the committee, 6 from each side, each house, 4 members from the majority party, 2 members from the minority party. It is the one committee or one group of legislators in this building that pretty much 99% of the time parks the party at the door, and they do the business of the state. And they're charged with interviewing and a lot of your agencies and different things like that, and come up with budget. The governor puts out a recommended budget, and then they hear your commentaries and why things should be, more money should be given or less money given, and they craft the budget. And then we come back in March, and that's when the real work starts, to start to move forward with everything. But if you have an issue, off season is the best time. Figure out which legislators have other jobs and which ones don't. If you know anything about me, if you want to come talk to me, I'm at Sharky's in Dewey Beach in the morning. Come have a cup of coffee with me. I'll give you all the time in the world. Some people, Gerald Doctor, for a prime example, owns like 17 different businesses and everything. I don't know how he does this job. And I don't think he sleeps. I think he's a vampire or something. I don't know. But he does great constituent services down in the Bethany Beach, Ocean View area. He's more difficult, I would think, to have a meeting with. But I know he tries. He does try to meet with anybody who wants to talk to him. And that's when I say those types of things, you got to get to your point quickly. With me, I'll take all day with it. I don't care if I have the time. So if it's, I mean, there's some issues right now. That you try to start to build your base of support in the off season. If there's serious enough issues, that's when you start. If it's something you're trying to bring forward in June, you might be prepared to wait till the next January to really get into it. But we sometimes introduce bills in late May and June, knowing full well they're not going anywhere. We just want to get the conversation started. And people know it's out there and it'll be coming back in January. So people have time to, if they want to, they can get some background information. They can start talking to different people about where they stand. This whole building is about relationships. That's all it's about.
So the art of starting a conversation. Would somebody like to pick up on that? You know, what's your experience in terms of starting that conversation?
Yeah. So I definitely come from a unique perspective, having worked in this building for 4 years. So what I took from that is exactly what the speaker was talking about, like a mix of the first time I ever stepped in this building and how I didn't realize you could go into any door. I mean, as long as the door's not locked, there's a meeting going on. It is the public's building. Then having been here as a staffer, seeing how things truly work, and then also seeing how, man, if I was on the outside, I could have helped that organization with the planning appropriately. So as the speaker said, it's a really important issue, regardless what it is, but they come in June 1st of an election year, and things just get, mucked up. So now what I do with the 12-7 group is actually sit down with those groups. Sometimes it's a year out, sometimes it's 6 months out, and actually strategize. Because again, that June 1st or July 1st until December 31st of an off year is when you can capacity build. That's when, for any issue that you want to get done in this building, the reality is you need to have constituent support there. Or if you're fighting an issue, you need to have constituents who are against the issue. And what does that mean? It's literally that those constituents in districts like the speaker are contacting them. Like, yes, I'm in favor of this, no, I'm not. And the reality is, if, for example, if you introduced a bill in June, like, how are you going to get hundreds of people together to support or, oppose a piece of legislation? So, my big piece in what we do now, and I think very important for any of the issues that you guys are all working on, is starting pretty far out to put together. And when it's starting far out, it's having the meetings, but it's also putting together a plan, putting together a timeline. So your timeline might be, I want this bill passed, but let's be realistic. Okay, it's going to be a 24-month plan, and then work back from that. So, month number 23 is when the bill actually passes the Senate and goes over to the House. But then you're talking about, who are the key sponsors? That's always a really important thing. When you're looking for a piece of legislation that you want to get done, you have to make sure, as the speaker said, it's relationships, but it's also perceptions. Like, you want to make sure that you have a representative or a senator who can carry the water for your issue, and even if they're not abreast on the situation, they'll take your talking points, they'll take your briefings. What you don't want to have is a legislator that might be on the out because of a certain issue or something they have done, and their name on the bill means that unfortunately, the way the building works, your legislation is going nowhere. So it's very strategic with that piece, and really planning ahead. The other fascinating thing for me is just back to the constituent voice. When I was here with the caucus, and won't go into any examples of legislation directly, but I saw firsthand some legislators that would say, okay, I'm opposed to this softly, just for their own personal reasons. But by the time the bill came up on the floor, they heard from 20 people, 25 people. You might think that 20 or 25 people isn't a lot, but for a legislator in their district, if they heard from 25 people in favor, but only heard 3 opposed, some legislators look at that as part of their decision-making process, in terms of where they go with the bill. For example, I worked with the speaker and the pro tem, and we worked with Equality Delaware for marriage equality. When we passed that legislation, when we started that up, we knew exactly what was going to happen. We knew the opposition. We knew what the talking points were. So we started 6 months out. We started July 1st of 2012 to the lead up for 13. We lined up the sponsors, as I talked about, even strategic, like the press conference to introduce the bill reduction. That's very standard here. You have a press conference to introduce a bill, people will come, the press will come. But making sure you have the right people there. So, okay, the legislators are there, but coalition partners. What different groups in the community can stand there with you and actually carry a message for that, for a certain piece of that legislation that you want to get done. And then what we really geared up, for that piece and knowing the fight we had, we actually hired 7 full-time organizers out in the field from January 1st of 2013 until June 30th, where they were knocking on targeted doors, making targeted phone calls, going into businesses. So, we worked with Rick, with DuPont, and DuPont signed up. We knew that opposition would say businesses don't want this because it's going to be bad for business. So what did we do? Our strategy was to get a list of 100 businesses here in Delaware that were in support of marriage equality. We knew that constituents were important. So we actually, at the end of that campaign, we put through slightly over 22,000 emails, phone calls, and handwritten letters to targeted legislators. The other important piece, if you're doing that work, and this is never a knock against any legislators, but track everything. Because it's one thing for a phone call to come into this building, but does the legislator track that? It's one thing for a letter to be sent here, but does it? So what I mean by tracking is actually capture the information. And then what we did with marriage equality, when it was time for the vote, we gave each rep and senator an Excel spreadsheet that had the name of every single constituent, the address, the phone number, and how they contacted their legislator. So that's just, again, a reminder, and it's them looking at it both ways. This is what happened. And part of that, too, is, and sometimes the legislators get, when the phones start blowing up here, mad at me, knowing that I'm on the outside now. Drumming up there. But part of that is the strategy, right? If you're having people call their legislators, don't do it on a Monday and Friday because they're not here. Do it on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday when they're trying to get business done. When the phones are ringing, the secretaries are answering the phones, the aides. Because what does that do? Yes, it agitates them, but the buzz is, oh my gosh, the phones won't stop ringing because all these calls are coming in on this issue.
What are you telling
and either for or against. The other thing, so phones is just one. So the other piece that we do is postcards. Again, you can collect the postcards. When you guys can bring them in and give them to the legislator, great. But that stack of 50 postcards at that point, it's great to have, but what's even better than that? Spread them out, for example, Thursday, Friday, Saturday at the post office. Only put 5 in the mail each day. So then what happens? That following Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there's postcards coming in, the phone's ringing. So I mean, that sometimes is what you have to do to really move stuff forward.
So, let me
Eric's causing trouble.
See, and what I do, I contract out to Eric. Because my firm doesn't do this kind of stuff, so I'm like, Eric, I got a job for you.
I want to say something about what he just said. Number one, you see why we had him as our chief of staff. All right, he's very good. He's very thorough. He's very, very, very good. And I was really pissed off with him when he left. Yeah, well, then you can come back anytime you want. So,
But I can't do this.
we'll work something out. Yeah, the one thing I do want to add to that, if you go to a legislator and you talk to them about your issue and they say, hey, I'm solidly on board, call the dogs off.
Correct, absolutely. I did not say that.
Don't pester them.
You will lose them.
You'll lose them
Yeah.
because it becomes no more about the issue than it now becomes, you pissed me off, and I'm not going to do it. People are people. Think of your own lives and how you act in some situations and things. These legislators are no different than you guys.
Okay, so here's some views from the inside. So let's talk a little bit about some views from the outside. Rick, you've represented a major corporation and now at the University of Delaware. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I thought I was going to be able to add a little more tactical input, but after Eric and speakers input, what I'll do is I'll give you a little broader context so you can have an understanding of at least the environment in which you operate. In my previous role, as I mentioned, I work with the University of Delaware. I lead our government relations operations here. But previous to coming to the university, I was with DuPont, and I led their state relations, government affairs throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, which included the Northeast. So I worked with legislatures from Maryland to Maine on issues related, to a very large science and chemicals business. So there was a lot of issues that I had to deal with on a regular basis. In fact, for a period of time, I worked in the company. My title was Crisis and Issues Manager, which, again, took me to places and I had to respond to issues only all around the country, including our response to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, as the company has 11 plant sites in the Gulf region. So again, just to give you some context on a broader scale about the Delaware government and the climate here, the Mid-Atlantic region, I've worked from like Albany, state capitals, and Harrisburg and Trenton, Annapolis. Albany is much like working in Washington, like Congress. Each member of the assembly there has maybe 10 staff people. In order to schedule a meeting, you have to schedule it weeks and weeks in advance. There's prep meetings, so you might need to meet with staff first. So in order to get your issue advanced in a place like Albany, again, years and years of advanced work. I'll point to a state like New Jersey. Is anyone here from New Jersey? So I can, okay, good. I'll go ahead and be completely candid. So in a place like New Jersey, there was, okay. I know her. She knows it. She knows it. So in a place like New Jersey, while you might have access, a different level of access to the elected officials, I've gone to meetings and had, whether it be proactive like communications or even responding to an issue, where before I met with that individual who I see across the room in this restaurant, I met with a friend or two who would frisk me and compliment my tie and tell me just, as they were preparing for this discussion, because the climate is so untrusting. They don't know, there's such an issue around, folks being indicted for saying the wrong thing and being questioned. And so they have to be very, very careful in who they contact, who they talk to, what they share, and how open those conversations were. Pennsylvania, not so much, a little bit of both. There's, again, a very interesting welcoming. You have the different contingents from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and then all those folks that represent the state in between. But again, you can advance issues, they're accessible, but not the same level of ethical issues and concerns and communication with folks. So with all that said, having worked in all those states, and then you have the New England states, which again can be fairly welcoming. Of all those places, Delaware is so welcoming and so engaging and interested, because I generally feel, although there may be disagreements about policy, in no place that I've worked have I felt that all of the folks that have been elected to these roles genuinely feel like they want to make a difference and contribute to changing the state and to make it a better place. You know, in other places, it's obvious that there are agendas. There's real politics, and some of it's not nice. With Delaware, I don't see that same type of environment. I think it's very, very collegial, and at the end of the day, regardless of the position, whether you're in agreement with it or not, I truly believe that folks are here and they're serving to try and find a way to support and make the state a better place. So with that said, as you talk about your communications, I think it's important to not, I mean, there's two types of communications, and Eric mentioned earlier about communicating proactively. How do you stage a proactive communication strategy to try and get a piece of legislation or policy moved? And 12, 24 months makes a lot of sense. But then there are those occasions, which is on the side of the fence as in-house counsel for a large chemical company, and I'm learning with the flagship university here in the state, you need to be prepared to respond to those issues, those acute issues that arise. And that conversation you cannot start that conversation or introduce yourself or even introduce the issue to legislators in that time of crisis. There needs to be some understanding of what your position, that entity, your organization, what your position is in advance of you coming into room, again, to share your position or to express your concerns as it relates to a particular issue or crisis that you might be facing. Because legislation at times, when you work for an organization, whether you're large or small, can have unintended consequences. And oftentimes, that's what I find that it really can be. Folks, the elected official that drafted the legislation just didn't know that there was an impact. So introducing yourself or introducing the issue to a legislator during the time of crisis is always a tough thing to do, and I would discourage you from having to deal with it in those circumstances. And I'll give you an example. New to the university, and that new thing is going to be wearing off real soon. I've been on board for about a year and a half now. But I wanted to really capture some things and messages that were important to the university. First, our commitment to Delawareans. How do we communicate about how we impact and serve the state, how we serve applicants and students who are from Delaware, at the university? I thought that was an important piece of information to share. The second piece is our economic development strategy and how we work so closely with the state with trying to grow and develop the state and support their efforts in bringing and building business here. We've been struggling. We've had two very large auto manufacturers that closed. We've had banks that are kind of deteriorating their presence here. There's just been this even my company, which I still hold dear, is slowly, declining, diminishing its presence in the state of Escapon. So clearly there's a need to be positioned to support economic growth here in Delaware, and I try and share the university's position to support that and the work that we're doing and why that's a priority for us. The last piece is we receive about a tenth of our budget, 10% of the university's budget is received through state appropriation. I tried to change that conversation a bit to make it look as if and appear that it's an investment, because quite honestly, it is an investment. And we haven't talked about it as an investment here with the state. As we receive those funds, there's an output. As they receive that, we receive that roughly $100 million from the state. There's a return that we contribute back. And we've been able to work with the university, a public policy institute, and they've been able to give us an economic a plan as to what that looks like. So really, we return, I think the number is like $62 billion that is pushed in and throughout the state from employees, from taxes, from different contracts and folks that we work with back into the state as a result of that initial investment of $100 million. So again, I tried to package those discussions so when we have an issue that addresses economic impact or economic growth, it's no surprise. So today we saw Representative Short, who's the chair of and I promise I'm watching my clock here, I know I can go. But Brian Short, the chair of our Small Business Caucus, he talked about the importance of the Delaware economic climate and how we want to grow business here. clearly that's consistent with what we're working on. So my communication immediately to him, knowing that that's something of importance to him, I want to make sure he knows and is continually updated on things that we're doing that he has an interest in. So that if there's an issue that occurs, it's no surprise to him. He knows what we're doing. He knows what we're working on. And it makes it easy for him to become a supporter or an advocate or to help us address an issue if in any event it arises. So with that said, I just ask you to be proactive. Think about the members of the General Assembly. Identify what their interests are. Communicate with them early. Communicate with them about things that you work on that you know connect directly to their areas of interest. And if there becomes a growth opportunity, as Eric mentioned, you know exactly who to go to, and you're not introducing yourselves to them. You're not sharing new information. You're just really providing updates. And on the other side, if there becomes a time of crisis, if there's an issue that occurs and things do come up that you feel that a piece of legislation might affect you, impact you negatively, it's not a new conversation. Folks are aware of your position on those areas, and they're either going to be you clearly supportive or not, and you'll know where the work needs to be done to try and address those issues. So being proactive and knowing the assembly.
Great, thank you, Rick, for those insights. And to your right, Vicki Kelly is coming at this from a somewhat different perspective. She's representing the interests of another branch of government, although I'm sure that you have perspectives beyond that. So tell us, Vicki, what rings true and what other kind of observations do you have to make with respect to the way you interrelate with the legislature?
Happy to. So you may be hearing things, you hear about DuPont Company, you hear about the marriage equality, both have had huge efforts. And listening to who's in the room, I realize some of that might sound really big, given some of your issues. And so I think my perspective might, help orient you a little differently here, but I think a lot of it is going to ring true with what you've already heard. I'm in the executive branch, so work for the governor. And I will tell you, having worked in a couple of other states in state government, I can echo exactly what Rick said, that Delaware is really different. The amount of collegiality that I think happens across state government and between various branches of government in Delaware is really different in terms of making things happen. So having worked in executive branch agencies in other states, we were often left as the implementers of policy and legislation with very little input. And, we run a few of our own bills, but they typically are very narrow focus to deal with, process or procedure issues. Substantive legislation that comes about that is really trying to address social issues, we don't do by ourselves, nor should we. I mean, I think they happen through partnership and collaboration. And so I wanted to share one example that I think is, actually it's the most powerful example I can think of in my whole career. And having been a legislative fellow on Capitol Hill early in my life, I can say this is still the most powerful thing. So I'm the director of the Division of Family Services within the Kids Department. And a few years ago, we were looking at data, and I want to stress data because I think that Kids Count plays this critical role. If we were in flush times with lots of surplus, it's easy, right? But that's not the landscape that we're in. And so I think the governor, the legislature are all making us look at what does the data tell us and what does best practice tell us. And so Kids Count plays this really critical role. So a few years ago, we were looking at data about outcomes for kids in Delaware. And I'll never forget seeing this chart. It wasn't a Kids Count chart, but it was done by another national organization. And it showed that we were 5th worst in the country in the percentage of kids that were aging out of foster care without permanent families. 5th worst. Now, usually, most things we're in the top 5 or 10, and it was horrifying to see that. And so what began were conversations, and we brought several legislators together outside of session, exposed them to youth. And I'll never forget, it was in this room about 3 or 4 years ago. One night, we brought the Youth Advisory Council, statewide organization of youth in foster care and alumni in foster care. And I think maybe 8 or 10 legislators joined us. And the youth did a presentation. They did a PowerPoint on what they saw as their barriers to successful transition into adulthood. And if any of you have young adults in your family, you know that 18 is not some magic number where suddenly you become an independent adult, right? That you need help. And certainly in these difficult economic times, there's need for even more. So I'll never forget, there were a couple of legislators who, were, so welcoming that the youth were here and, very cordial, but thinking that they were going to somehow lead the evening. And once these youth started, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. And there were probably 60 young people in the room, number of adults that support them, and these 8 or 10 legislators who ended up sitting back and just being in awe. And so I offer that because I think that it's not just what we leverage among ourselves and relationships and together, but bringing forth the voices of the people that are impacted by what we do. And so that's how it started. A couple of years later, they successfully got through the Ready by 21 legislation, which created developmentally appropriate stipends to help young people 18 to 21. And we're early in this process, but the outcomes are already incredible in terms of improved, academic attainment, stability, and staying out of, adult systems. So that's the power, I think, that relationships, because we leveraged relationships and we brought people together from diverse sectors, not just folks that had always worked with foster care, but we had representatives from DEDO, the Economic Development Office, who started working with us about training for employment. We had DelDOT at the table, talking about transportation. Delaware State University has been an incredible partner in this. So I think it was the power of relationships, it was the power of the voices of people impacted. And though with that, which I'm going to harken back to something that the speaker said, is that this process is intimidating. And so in the first year when youth stood up and testified at Joint Finance and other hearings, they did pretty good, but it was pretty emotional. And, we found that our responsibility was to prepare them. And really, we worked with them. It was their voice, but to help them be prepared to do the best that they could. And I will tell you, over the last couple of years, seeing some of these young people who have become incredibly articulate, outspoken, and compelling presenters has really moved the agenda forward. So there are lots of messages in there, and some of you in this room, I think, have touched parts of that. So I don't know that would have been possible. I mean, we've now gone around the country and talked about that, and other states have been amazed at what we have been able to do, and I think it is because of the kind of collegiality, the advisory council meetings. We brought them along so that they really could understand, and then they were in a position to really be good strategic partners with them.
So not only do you benefit from the voice that participants give to the cause, but you've essentially helped to empower them to express their voice more effectively in the future, so they can represent their own interests increasingly in a more effective way as time goes on.
And that one project now continues to mushroom because they have their own legislative agenda that they run now separate from us.
So Victor, what do you think? You represent another very important major institution of higher education in the state. From your standpoint, what rings particularly true, or do you have another perspective to offer that differs from what we've already heard?
I'll start by asking, legislators are people, so how would you feel how would you feel about a person if every time you saw them, they were asking you for something? You saw so-and-so walking down the hall, and you knew every time you saw that person, they were going to ask you for something. Would you look forward to seeing that person? Probably not, right?
So a lot of what's important is having that relationship. We have target legislators that we deal with a lot. We have great relationships with. The side of those folks were basically, a lot of it was by geography. We have our Kent County folks who we deal with a lot. We bring them on campus. We have them for lunch every year. They meet with the president. If there's an issue, these are folks that we know we can go to. But a lot of that is just dealing with them on a casual basis, knowing them by first name. Have to do is, I'll call Rick, and then we also have a contract with Kim, so I'll call Kim, and we'll say, this is the issue that we're dealing with. Let's come up with a strategy all together to work together to figure it out. So without what you guys are doing, if there's an issue at First State Community Action in Georgetown, and that they think is important, or the folks at West Side probably is important too. So let's have the folks in Georgetown deal with some Sussex County legislators. Let's have the folks in Wilmington deal with the Wilmington legislators, and let's kind of have a joint plan for how we can figure out the problem. Those were the four things I wanted to.
Great. Thank you, Victor. Kim, last but not least, this idea of strategizing for how you approach an issue and how you essentially advance it in this building. How do you do that? How do you develop a strategy? What kind of conversation, what kind of thinking has to go into understanding how you're going to approach this issue, even before you start communicating with anyone?
So I will, in regards to that, I'll talk about three topics. One of them being relationships, which you've already heard a lot about. Another being timing, and then tools in the toolbox that we use. So I am a contract lobbyist, and that means that as long as my clients don't have a conflict with each other, I can pretty much represent anybody. And I have a fair amount of clients that I like to say range from beer to trash. I represent Anheuser-Busch, which is a international company, and I represent waste management, literally trash. I represent haulers. I also represent scrap metal processors. But I do a fair amount of healthcare work, and as Victor said, we also represent and help him on higher education issues. So, like I said, you've heard a lot about the relationship piece, and you've heard it from every single one of us. And Delaware, everybody says, oh, it's so Delaware, it's so small, but it's true. It's a place where they're physically doing their work that they've been elected to do. And they don't have a half an hour to talk to you unless you get here at 10 in the morning. So you really need to walk in and be able to say, there's a bill on the table, and here's my issue. And all that relationship building that you have done over the years with your base of support helps educate them to a level where they get it. And you don't have to come in with that 500-page fact book. They may need it at some point, but let them ask you for that. And you come in and you say, here's our issue, and here's why we have a problem with it, or here's why we support it. In my firm, there's 3 of us in my firm, and we like to say that you should be able to talk to a legislator and get your point across in the time it takes to go from one floor to the other on the elevator. Now, this building is a little slow, but still, and we do it all the time. You catch legislators walking down the hall, and you say, you got a minute, let me walk with you, and that's it. You have 2 minutes to get your point across. So when you're talking about strategy, you have to think about the long-term strategy, which is your relationship piece, and which is the education piece, and then you have to be able to boil that all down into that 2-minute speech. And so for the clients that I represent, that's why they come and they hire us, because that's our expertise. We take everything they have, and we take their goals and their vision and their mission, and we boil it all down, and we do whatever it is we need to do with it in that amount of time. So that's why people hire people like me and don't expect you all to do it, because you guys are out doing what you have an expertise in. So that's one. So let me talk a little bit about timing, and I'm going to talk about timing from a couple different perspectives. A lot of you in the room, actually most of you in the room, are probably from the nonprofit or the NGO side. And my guess is that some of your funding comes through the state agencies. And if you look at the legislative cycle, the legislators come in January and they work through June. And as the speaker already said, they work 3 weeks in June or January, 9 days. They go out for 6 weeks for the Joint Finance Committee and bond bill hearings. They come in for a couple weeks, they go out for spring break, they come in for a couple weeks, they go out for budget markup, and then they come back in. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is that those Joint Finance Committee hearings deal with the state agencies that you all deal with. So if you're trying to push your agenda or you're trying to get something across, you have to understand that that state agency that you're working with, their priority is those Joint Finance Committee hearings because that's where their funding comes from and ultimately then may go to you. So it's important for you to understand how the timing works so that you can be sensitive to the state agencies you're working with because their focus has to be over here on these hearings and then they can kind of deal with your issues. So if we're working on an issue that's has the ability to have some length to it, typically we'll start working with clients in September, October in prep for maybe getting something introduced in January, but mostly you're looking at like March to try to get something introduced and then move it forward through the end of session. January, there's a lot of formality stuff that happens, people are sworn back in, and there's a lot of resolutions that come up, so not a whole lot of real substantive work gets done. So having, and then the other part of my job is I have to manage expectations. And you might come into my office and say, we have got to get this done and it has to be done by the end of January. I'm going to say, well, we can try, but that's probably not going to happen, and here's why. And it's cyclical, it's just the way it is. We could try to change it. The speaker says they have tried to change it. I've been doing this about 12 years, and it's the same every year. The crunch time is the end of May and June, and that's really when about 85% of the work gets done. Let's see. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is some of the tools in the toolbox, because it's everybody, and Victor said this, people are people. And so you have to think about the people that you're dealing with and how they're going to respond. Eric alluded to some of the ways that, and we have used Eric's services before because my firm we don't specialize in grassroots. Don't want to specialize in grassroots. Eric's really good at grassroots, so we have engaged him to work on grassroots. So that's one of the tools that we use. You go after those legislators, whether you're in favor or whether you oppose, and you go after them from lots of different ways. You can do the mailers, you can do the emails, you can do the phone calls. Some of the other things we use are one-on-one meetings. Sometimes we will do big group meetings. I represent Norfolk Southern, which is the freight train railroad. I'm sure you've all been stuck behind an oil train at some point in the past 2 years. That's my client. We started working on that issue the moment we knew that was going to happen, that coal was going to be trucked into the refinery. We said, all right, we need to manage this issue. This is going to be a big issue. This isn't a legislative issue necessarily because it's a federally run organization, but we need to manage this issue in Delaware. So we corralled a group of legislators and council people that were going to be affected by this sort of ripple in the daily life. And we've been working with them for 2 years. I would say it was monthly in the beginning, now it's more like quarterly, but that's another tool. You have specific groups that have a specific interest in the area that you're gonna deal with, and again, Victor said the same thing, and you focus on it, and that's the other way to build that relationship. And then I will close with something that we sort of live by in our office, and that is, and the speaker made reference to this too, don't ask for a vote you already have, and don't ask for a vote you're not going to get. And that goes back to knowing your legislators. If you have the vote, leave it alone. Call out the dogs. There's no reason to go there. If you are not going to get the vote, you're not going to get the vote. So generally where we work is in the middle. There's always going to be some yeses, there's always going to be some no's, and there's always going to be some that are on the fence. And our job is to work with those on the fence. These issues that we all work with, legislators, state agencies, you guys, they're not black or white. They're 65-35, 70-30, 60-40. They're somewhere in that range. And sometimes it's 51-49. It's very rarely a straight yes or no. If it is, you don't need people like us. You guys can, get this stuff done yourselves. So don't ask for a vote you already have. Don't ask for a vote you're not going to get.
Well, you've heard a lot of wisdom from our 6 panelists, and it's your turn to pose some questions. You want to ask for elaboration, bring up a whole different topic that maybe hasn't been touched on, but we'd like to hear from all of you. Do we have a first question?
Steve, could I reinforce
Sure.
this one point as we talk about the toolbox, because I think it's also important knowing that I think I heard a lot of folks represent nonprofit organizations, and I'm sure everyone knows and believes that your organization is doing very meaningful and impactful work in the communities that you serve. So another piece is inviting the legislators, as we talk about that relationship building piece, and you heard Victor mention it, inviting them into your organization to spend the day or to spend the morning or to really see your operation and get a sense of the work that you're doing that's making a real impact in the communities that you serve. Let them see it. Let them feel it directly so that they can experience the work that you're doing, so that when that time comes, as we mentioned, building that bank of goodwill, developing and strengthening that relationship that we keep highlighting. Bring them in, let them see it, let them feel it, let them connect with, for me, the students, their programs, the research work, and for you, whatever it is that you might be doing, let them see it. Talk to some of your parents or members of the community that you serve, so again, they can see the real impact of your work. So just as we talk about that toolbox, relationship building.
Mr. Speaker.
There are a couple things that have been, first off, we didn't rehearse any of this, and I'm really, really happy to hear some of these comments being made, because it's how I feel that we work here and how we all work independently but interrelated with each other. Delaware is a great state, and it is a small state, and I represent the beach area, which is the retiree area, where they're coming from all these other states, and they call, and I answer the phone, and they said, we need to leave a message for the representative. I said, go ahead. And they said, well, are you ready to take a message? I said, it is a representative. And they go, no, it's not. Yes, it is. And I have to prove to them that I'm the representative somehow, and I came from Pennsylvania. You never hear from you never get to talk to anybody in court. You go to a restaurant and you stop and they talk. So it is different in our state. You have immediate access to us, and that's the way it should be. As long as you don't,
don't abuse the privilege.
If I'm out with my family, my kids or something, say hi, whatever. Hey, I want to talk to you later. I'll get up with you. That's fine. Don't come to my table while I'm eating dinner and then try to sit down with me and have a 20-minute conversation with my wife, because she's going to hit you. A couple things that have been mentioned here. Sponsors. Let me put this as a game. I know nothing about the rules of rugby. For me to walk onto a rugby field and try to play rugby, I would get stomped, I would get beaten, and I would probably get hurt. Learn the rules, learn the boundaries, learn the players when you deal with this building. It's very simple. You wouldn't want to walk in here cold and think you know everything about how to be successful. You're not going to be. These guys here have spent years figuring it out how to do it the best way. And that's just an analogy that I think if you keep it in mind, you'll be much better off. Victor brought up something I want to clarify. Every night we're in session, there's a legislative reception someplace. Now, some of you sitting home would say, oh, they're on the tape, they're getting meals, they're getting this, they're getting that. I don't look at it that way. If you're representing an organization, so say the retired school employees, okay, they have an organization. They have a reception over at the lobby house over here. They invite legislators to come over there. They're getting the best bang for their buck. They're giving us a small meal or a drink, and they're getting legislators that are going to sit down and socialize with them and learn their issues. And that's what it's all about. There's a push that we shouldn't be allowed to do any of that. If you don't do that, you're never going to get the audience. I mean, it might sound a little shallow. I look forward to going to these receptions and learn more about different organizations. And I actually feel guilty when I can't make some of them. But Dr. Williams had us over the other night for dinner. First time I'd been, I didn't even know that part of the campus existed. I had never been on the backside there. And It was a pleasurable evening. We had a great time. It was what, like 6 legislators?
Mm-hmm.
But I learned so much more about the university in that one sit-down dinner than I knew from 12 years of being here. So it's very important. Know your sponsors. Who was it? You said that. Who was it? One of you said it. We're all people.
Know your base.
We're all people. You have people that you work with you can't stand. You have people that you don't trust. You have people that you wouldn't go ask for help. And you have people that you would trust your life with. It's no different in this building. We have people that we get along with. We have people sometimes we don't get along with. We have people that can hold a grudge, and we have people. I'm going to tell you, you make me mad, I'm going to tell you where I am, and then we can go have a beer if you want. It doesn't bother. I don't hold it. I find I'm much happier that way. You have people that hold a grudge just because they think you slighted them. And there's people that I know that if their name's out on as a prime sponsor, I'm not signing off. I don't care what the issue is. Doesn't mean I won't support the issue. Doesn't mean I won't vote for it. But I'm not advertising my name on there. There's names that come across, as soon as you see it, you just push it off to the side because you know it's not going to go anywhere because they don't have the support amongst the rest of the people in the building. So it's a waste of time. Another thing, 2 chambers in this building, House and the Senate. You get something done on one, you got to start all over again on the other side. Mm-hmm. People say, well, what do you think about this bill? And I said, well, you know what, I'll tell you what I think about that bill when it passes the Senate, it comes over here, because there's no need in me worrying about it if it's not coming out of the Senate. Just a waste of my time to try to worry about it. So if the bill's a Senate bill or a House bill, work that side. Don't start the other side until you know you're going to make it be successful on one side, or you're probably just wasting your time. And the last thing, we talked about votes. We're all elected. In my house, it's every 2 years, which is a pain in the neck to you guys as well as us. We have to spend a lot of money. We have to be out there getting votes. And you guys get inundated with mail and all that phone calls and all that stuff, and I know you hate it. We do things up here, I don't know, pick a percentage, 90% of the time based on getting reelected. And the way I look at it is, if we don't get reelected, I think we do a lot of good for people. I can't continue to do good for people if I don't get reelected. So a lot of us worry about the vote on the issues. And then there's times when you just do what the hell you have to do because it's the right thing to do, and if you don't get elected, it's too bad. And I just did one of those things down in my district with the senior center. I cut off funding to a senior center because it was so poorly run and the seniors were upset, and it was a very politically risky move because some seniors just say, hey, you cut off our money, and they could turn on me. And in my district, seniors are a big voting bloc. But it was the right thing to do because I couldn't get the attention of the board to fix the problems. I shut the money down. All of a sudden they had to come to us and sit down and say, how do we fix this? I said, you all resign, we elect a new board, and we'll fix it, and you'll get your money back. So I did what I had to do because it was the right thing to do. Could have turned really ugly on me. It didn't. I'm very fortunate, but it was the right thing to do. But years ago, stem cell research, we had a bill for the stem cell research. It's very controversial in some people's minds. As you said, I donated a kidney. I know the potential for stem cell research. At some point in time, I'm hoping that through stem cell research, they'll be able to grow their own daggone kidneys. They don't have to have mine. So I was a solid yes vote. If you come out as a legislator, and I tell my guys all the time, if you know where you are on an issue, let people know where you are so they'll leave you alone. If they think you're on the fence, they're going to eat you up because they know they might get you, or they might push you off the fence. The Catholic Church came up with and I'm Catholic, so I'm not busting on the church. Came up with a program. They were against the stem cell. They came up with a rose and a prayer. Remember? Yeah? Oh, yeah. They came up with a program, and what they did was they offered to their parishioners, for $3, we'll get a rose and put your name on that rose, and we'll make sure your legislator gets it. So they did this program throughout the state. So each one of us in the House to indicate these people were against the stem cell bill. So I got 5 roses in my district. I have a very progressive district. I have a very educated district. I have all these retirees coming in at 40 years old, 42 years old. with, master's degrees, doctorates from Washington, D.C., government people, Philly, New York, they're all coming to my area. Well, I had some people come in and basically tell me I was lying, that I only had five roses, but my point is, we had a legislator at the time, who was a nurse, who knew the benefits of stem cell research, who strongly wanted to vote for the bill, who made herself physically sick worrying about this bill and this vote, to the point where she said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was like, why? You know where you are, you know where you stand. But I got to show you something. It took me in a room and showed me 3 vases full of roses. We counted them, 63, I think it was. She goes, look at all these things. I've got to vote against this bill. And I went, 63 roses? You represent 23,000 people. Why would you think 63 roses is going to get you unelected? And that goes back to the point, the flooding and the way he does it, it was very effective. I was on his side on that, so it was good. I was glad to see it. But, the constant, like the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday thing, the phone's ringing off the hook. You walk in and your assistant hands you a stack this big of people calling in. You go, So you have to understand those things when you work in this building to try to be successful. But that's what the legislators are fickle, man. I won't tell you. They are. They can be just as hard to deal with, or they can just, some of the things that you think would fly through this place get bogged down and just stop. And then other things you think are going to be a really big fight, everybody just lets them go.
So questions, we need your questions. Yes.
Is there any chance